All right. Well, so thank you very much for joining us. As you guys know, I reached out to you specifically and asked if you could join us and help folks understand where topics come from. So we're going to go through a series of questions that can kind of get us to that point. And I thought maybe we'd start off with introducing ourselves. I'm really bad at that, Connie. I still didn't introduce myself, but you guys can. So if you want to introduce yourself, talk about where you are in the S&T organization and just kind of generally what that part of the organization does, that'd be great. Rosanna, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll start. Hi, everyone. My name is Rosanna Anderson. I am the Director of Program Operations and Execution within S&T's Office of Mission and Capability Support. Our office is focused on delivering near-ish term solutions to the component partners as well as first responders. Under our office, we have 19 programs that span everything from cybersecurity to first responder technologies to chem biodetection and the like. I manage a pool of about 50 program managers, and we are probably the largest consumer of the long-range BAA bandwidth. So probably most of who you'll hear from later today are probably on my team.
Great. Sorry. And hopefully this is working. Yep. And good morning, everybody. Jim Small, and I'm the portfolio manager for Customs and Border Protection. So there are 13 of us, and we represent all the major components of DHS. So portfolio manager, it's a little bit different than what you might think a portfolio manager is. So a few different roles that we have. We are the Undersecretary's direct representative to a particular component that we're assigned to. We also, we run an IPT, integrated product team, that evaluates the different requests and R&D asks of the different components. That team is made up of experts throughout S&T and the component. So we kind of evaluate things before they get to a formal submission to S&T to work on something. And then also we shepherd projects with the PMs throughout their life cycle. And we have a very formal process once something becomes a project all the way to delivery.
Hi, Sridhar Kavli, DHS. We are part of the tech center. So where Rosanna is focused on near term, we are focused on peer research long term, 5+ years. So my background is primarily communications and networking. So we're focused on interoperability, we're focused on standards development, as well as testing and deploying communication systems and networks. So that's kind of our background.
All right, thank you. Jim, I'm going to start with you because kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because we start with, we have a need, and that's kind of in your area. So I was wondering if you could elaborate, you talked about a little in your intro, but if you could elaborate on how we figure out what the needs are from the components.
Great question. So each of the components, and when we say component, we mean a major element of DHS. So in my component happens to be CBP, but each component has their own process internal to their operation, where they collect R&D requirements from throughout the component. They evaluate them, and then they prioritize those for us. Now, some of the components have their own R&D appropriations from Congress, and they have their own appropriate R&D offices. So in those cases, those components are kind of doing a balancing act between what they should take on themselves and then what things that they would have to send over to S&T. So you have that aspect of it. Like I said earlier, we set up these IPTs with the components so that we can help them. We can bring in some experts ahead of before something actually becomes a project, so that we can evaluate the ask, make sure it's an R&D question, make sure there's a science question in there, and then also to kind of pulse the system to see who's already working on something, who's already got something moving. That's where LRBAA comes in to play. So we do a lot of that work up front And then those things are moved over to the actual formal process once they're submitted to S&T and into the budget process and assigned to the PMs.
Oh, spoiler. So, Rosanna, I was going to ask, how do you find out about the needs? Jim just calls you up and says, hey, we got another one. It's hot. So how do you guys find out about it? And then what do you do within MCS to try to turn that into progress towards a capability?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I think Jim nor I really said is that the program managers and portfolio managers are a team. So we engage with components together. So they are the primary face, but we do work in lockstep with the portfolio managers so that we as PMs ensure that we understand the mission. So that's step one, right? So that we're not going after solutions that don't fit the mission. As far as how we find out, we do have formal mechanisms internal to S&T, which probably would bore everyone here. But we do track and manage all of the incoming needs. And of course, the good program managers also keep up with some external to the IPT needs, strategic priorities that come from the White House or from S1, which isn't the DHS secretary, which isn't really captured as a pure component. As far as turning those into a no kidding project, we work closely with tech centers, with the portfolio manager, with systems engineers to determine what kind of project it's going to be, because it could be we just need to do some basic research, in which case MCS would say this isn't really for us, and we would hand it to tech centers to execute. But if it is something that we think that there is a tangible solution that is achievable within the 3 to 5 year time frame that will provide that direct operational impact and benefit to the components, then MCS would take it. The other thing we do as far as assigning it to one of our 50-ish PMs, we have 7 divisions that are aligned with our thrust areas, and we allocate the needs to those divisions. So each division also has a strategic plan and path for how they would do that work. Sorry, I saw a friendly face.
Thank you. All right. Sridhar, coming to you. So you talked about the long-term research. That's got to be challenging. How do you guys kind of determine what those are and how they're prioritized and pursued?
So it's actually a very interesting problem, because for us, there's a lot of market drivers. There's a lot of technology drivers. I think it sort of helps to sort of break it down a little bit. Let's pick an example of 5G, right? So everybody thinks 5G, okay, great. It's another G, it's a pipe, right? That's not true. So the question is, we take a look at how would that technology, whether it's AI or quantum, how does it actually intersect with what we are doing on a day-to-day basis in support of mission, as well as understanding how those technologies and influence could drive evolving threats, impact to mission, whether it's the operations or down the road with technology evolution. So the other piece that we look at is we look at cross-cutting with DoD, NSF. What we don't want to do is, with our limited budgets and our capabilities, we don't necessarily want to target something that somebody else is working on, right? So it's, number one, it's not a great use of taxpayer dollars. The second is we want to at least address the deltas and the gaps in technology that are not being done, right? So our focus areas are driven and influenced by all of those emerging technologies, emerging threats, and then try to develop an understanding of how that would influence and or drive either technology development, research gaps, as well as an understanding of what the downstream effects are. So those are our major drivers. And again, we're looking long-term. And if there's, quick hits and wins, we obviously reach out to MCS and sort of provide them with technical support in doing those things. But and then we rack and stack, right? What is the most mission impactful capability or technology that we want to drive that will then provide a return on investment that makes sense?
Thank you. So Jim, I'm coming back to you. So when you are working with the components. Is there ever a situation where you get needs that either seem at odds with each other, they're incongruent, or there could be overlapping? And what is the process for making sure that we know how to resolve what those issues or differences might be?
Great. Yeah. So we did a lot of work with the components over the last few years to really bolster up their internal processes so that they have some checks and balances in there, so that if, especially with CBP, so CBP is a very large organization, 66,000 folks plus, and 4 major operational components. So there are a lot of different mission spaces. So you're going to have some redundant requirements that bubble up to their internal process and to the IPT. And that's the beauty of having that IPT in place, is that, if we get a requirement that comes from one of the sectors and it goes directly to someone at S&T, which is, that never happens. But if we do get one of those, the beauty is that, we're able to kind of close the loop on that and bring that back to the IPT and say, hey, we received this from this sector. Is this something that the whole organization is in need of? And maybe it's a new requirement, and maybe they go, wow, that's something that we didn't even think of, and they add it fold it into the priorities and maybe reprioritize that. Maybe it's just an emergent need that, needs to be filled right now, and that goes right to the top. So, but there's an internal mechanism within the component, plus we're kind of the second stage of that in the IPT level where, and then we can also say, oh, DoD is already working on this, or we would check in with Sridhar or check in with Rosanna and say, who's working on this? Can we bring that person in to maybe advise them on how they should go about it? So that's how we do it.
Always nice to use that rich sibling at DoD to leverage their funding, not have to do it ourselves. So, Rosanna, there's lots of ways that you guys pursue solutions. It's not just LRBAA. So I guess and as you mentioned, you are one of the major consumers or customers for LRBAA. Thank you. How do you take what you get, those needs, and determine which ones are a good fit for LRBAA?
Yeah, so I think maybe I'll put it in scale for the number of needs that we have come in. I think on any given year across all the components, 100 to 200 needs. So not all of them are going to be, for industry. Some of them are going to be research needs, in which case we'll reach out to our academic partners. When it comes to choosing long-range BAA, we look for those mission needs that are maybe a little bit more complex, maybe where we can't define sort of specific nitty-gritty requirements, like we know we need this kind of button that can do this kind of things, but we're really looking to tap into sort of the whole collective thought and the innovation ecosystem that you all bring, where we have some flexibility in the kinds of solutions that we're going to bring to the component to solve that problem. We also typically tend to use long-range BAA for these things that are a little bit more gnarly, a little bit more recurring, because there might be that longer tail, and we want to keep up with kind of the latest innovations that are driving. So, talk about that sort of technology leading edge that might influence how we would respond for the components. So I think the innovation ecosystem and the flexibility when we have that is why we would choose a long-range BAA over some other mechanisms.
And so, Jim Sridhar, it's sort of a similar question. So, I mean, it sounds like maybe the LRBAA can be used to kind of help accelerate our progress in particular areas. Would you think of it used that way, or do you have a different perspective?
Yeah, at least from on the requirements side of things, we learn a lot from that process, because we just don't know who's working on what out in the larger ecosystem, even internationally, right? So, and it's not that we're using that to build requirements. We're using that to actually, bring in those folks to work with us. But for us, it's very informative on the requirements side to see who's out there, who's already tackling some of these really tough problems. So.
Yeah, I think you covered most of it, Jim. But I think the one thing I would add is a lot of things we don't know, how particular evolution of technology and or capability that's going to drive a particular threat vector down the road, or we may not understand the problem, or there might be a gap that we haven't thought of. And that's the perfect place for the LRBAA, because we're not prescriptively driving a specific gap and or solution. We're saying, here's the rough, essentially bin, put things in. And in which case you all come in and say, here's what we think is a potential problem, and here's what innovation that we think we'd like to work on. And I think that would be the follow through.
And I mean, you guys are all super, super smart, but having that new perspective is really beneficial as well, I would imagine. So yeah. All right, Rosanna, I have one more for you, and then I'm going to send some across the board. So I gave you a heads up, I think, and I meant to check with you. Do you have any success stories that you'd like to, help share with the audience that may help them understand what LRBAA can do?
Yeah, so there are a number of success stories. I have a cheat sheet, but I'm going to try to do it without the cheat sheet. A few years back, we were working with Border Patrol, and they have a need for data integration, even in remote and austere environments. They have some great technology, team awareness kit, which enables them to sort of keep track of everything and everyone. But if you don't have cellular service or land mobile radio coverage, then that team awareness kit doesn't really do you much good. So through the long range BAA, we found a vendor that did like a SATCOM vendor that could enable transfer of low bit data even in remote and austere environments. So we partnered with them, and they could plug and play into the TAC environment. So it was really easy to integrate. It was really easy to test and to demonstrate and to develop that capability in partnership with CBP. While we were still doing the development and rough testing with CBP, there were two kind of quick wins. One, an agent got stranded with no one around, but he still had the SATCOM test device and the TAC kit. He was able to send a signal, and his teammates came and got him, within a matter of minutes. And additionally, after that, there was an instance where there was a need for a search and rescue operation. This is where I need my cheat sheet. 1,200 miles off the U.S. coastline in the Pacific coast. And they were testing out this technology. And again, they were able to relay signals in that remote, austere environment, 1,200 miles off the coast, and enable a rescue mission that happened in half the time that they would have expected it to take. So those are just some of the ways, right? We had a need, we weren't prescriptive about the solution, but it had, no kidding, operational impacts even while in the sort of test and development stage.
Thank you so much. To me, it's always really nice to hear success stories, because a lot of times those success stories are, like you're saying, not even things that we would necessarily recognize that are being done by DHS, or, don't get a lot of the news, but it is still things that we have to pursue, and these are great to hear about. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll piggyback there. I mean, one is for officer and agent safety, right? We have a mission, we're going out there, but we need to keep those on the front lines safe and recognize that that's part of what S&T can do as well in partnership with industry.
Yeah, my GPS, the most common things it says is, please make the first authorized U-turn, because even with that, I can't imagine this poor CBP agent out there with nothing, right? I'd be lost for days. It'd be bad. So, all right. So I want to kind of get a little bit into, because for awareness, we look for folks to look at the submissions that we get to the LRBAA from multiple perspectives. And these are sort of representative of the perspectives that we look for. So obviously we want somebody like Sridhar that understands the technical or scientific elements of this and can really be able to go, okay, what you've put down is innovative. There a good feasibility that this is possible in the state of science. And then Jim, with working with the components, we want to make sure, well, just because it would work scientifically, that doesn't necessarily mean that operationally that would still be a solution. So either a PFM or an operational user would help. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're doing things in a way that all fit together in a programmatic way, and that we're not just going off on different tangents and they don't all kind of fit together. So given that, and I know even if you haven't specifically looked at LRBAA submissions, I know you've looked at submissions for R&D. What are the elements that you would recommend that somebody that's looking at proposing or submitting to the topics would address? Something that to make sure, hey, sometimes people forget about this. Any recommendations on that?
Okay, I can jump in first. So one of the big things that we have been focusing on within MCS, particularly in budget-constrained environments, is really on that return on investment, for lack of a better word. So like, we're investing X amount of dollars. What is the no kidding impact that we expect that to have? What are those tangible benefits for the Homeland Security enterprise, for the operators who are out there putting their lives on the line? And that's a really critical piece, and tying it to that mission, which probably Jim will talk about. And then we also look to see whether or not it's in sort of the strategic direction. So I mentioned that we have 7 divisions. Each of those 7 divisions do have strategic priorities and a long-term roadmap. And so making sure that the technology is in line with kind of where we're aiming to go organizationally. But if I would say harp on one thing, it'd be on that return on investment, that return of impact.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. And really, like Rosanna said, we want to see who you're working with already. If you've already done something with DoD, you've done something with another DHS component, that's very helpful to us, because that gives us a background of where your knowledge is at, and then what successes you've already had with some of these things that you're proposing. One thing I will say is, as someone who does a lot of evaluations on some of these things, just let us know where you are in your development up front. So let us know up front. If you're in concept phase and you don't have a prototype yet, that's fine. If you have a prototype but you don't have a final solution, that's totally fine. Just let us know that. So there's a lot of times we get through a presentation and you think that it's a final product ready to go, that's ready to go take on the world, and then we find out through question and answer, which we always will find out through question and answer, that it's still on paper, right? You're just starting, and that's totally fine. We like that. This is wonderful. But just let us know up front, where you are with things, and that really it allows us to say, all right, this is how we can maybe shape this technology, or this is how maybe we can shape the direction of the R&D. It's just very critical for us. So that would be my one suggestion.
And so would you recommend they get savvy on, if they are not already, TRL, technology readiness level, as a way to be able to communicate where they think they are? No, there's a face.
Sorry, I had an initial face. I think people sometimes will say, oh, I have a TRL 7 product. But it's TRL 7 in a certain environment, and we're going into multiple environments. And so it's helpful to an extent, but I don't solely rely on it.
And I want to put out there, I do this, we cannot fund, like I said, just generally at S&T, we're not funding end stage products. This, I don't know how to emphasize better. We can't fund it if it's too far along. So we are looking for things that are earlier stage in terms of their development. So do not feel like that's not something you should share. It's better if we're all on the same page and understanding where it is. I'm sorry, I jumped in before we.
No, that's fine. It's important. this may be counter, and I apologize in advance. Sometimes you have very small real estate in terms of doing the initial, 2-pager, right? You also have pitch. So I encourage you guys to not focus on what your company has done in the background and give overhead. Get to the point, right? And then you want to actually show value of what the problem set you're solving. You don't want to be a self-licking ice cream cone and try to get your technology to force fit it into either an operational construct or a need. Address the mail, address how this is going to make DHS and the Homeland safer, what the value proposition is. We look for that stuff. We look for what is the actual technology and demonstrate, I know it's very small real estate, but demonstrate how A, you understand the mission scope, and B, you understand that you have a very good fundamental understanding of the problem that you're trying to solve and what the R&D benefits / outcomes are. As Rosanna mentioned, that is sort of the recipe, the rubric for success. So I encourage you guys to submit often, but keep those constructs in mind. You're not throwing things at the wall to make them stick, but you really want to answer the mail, because then the probability of success goes much higher, and the value of what you're submitting is realized by us.
Thank you. And at the beginning, I said that the LRBAA was in the Office of Industry Partnerships, and this truly is a partnership when we're doing this. So I always, people will sometimes come up to me. I also have the SBR program. We'll do one-on-ones, and they'll come up and say, "What does DHS want? What do they need?" And I'm like, I haven't had a chance to talk to all 250,000 people in DHS. There is a responsibility for you to come with some understanding of what our need is in terms of how that is to what things can be solved, what that need really is, not just a kind of, well, I've heard that there's this issue and we need to address it, but really understanding some of the fundamental pieces of that. And all of the topics, when you go to the portal, have a place where it says resources. Highly recommend, and we look at really what we can provide that can help folks better understand it. It's to our benefit and your benefit. So I highly recommend that you take a look at those resources as a way to better understand what we need, because this really does need to be a partnership. And I'll just give oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just one other data point. Again, this is research and development, right? So I think you've said it about 8 times, Dusty?
It's R&D.
So the other key point is, do your due diligence to make sure that you're addressing a gap that no one else is doing, right? If you come to us and we say, hey, we've seen this before already, then obviously you're wasting your time, we're wasting our time. Really address and understand the market, understand where you are and what problem set you're solving, because that's the best recipe for success.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is a little bit different, but similar to what we discussed. So in terms of, when we evaluate what we get, we're looking at strengths and weaknesses. We're saying, how does this fit what we need, and where are some of the weaknesses? So we're looking at what are the chances that it could succeed? What are the areas where there might be a risk? And inherently with R&D, there's risk. So it's not like if you submit something and there's some risk that we're not going to, oh, we can't do it, there's risk. That's part of what we deal with. But are there kind of common strengths and weaknesses that you've seen to submissions that you can talk about and help people make sure that they don't fall into that bucket of things that may need to be addressed?
Like Sridhar said, you only have so much real estate on that 2-pager, right? Make it about what you're working on. Make it about not necessarily the technology, but the problem set that you're evaluating, and not as much about your company. We're going to want to hear about your company, but we have those opportunities throughout the process. So when you give your pitch, we'll hear a little bit about your company, but then when you do the formal written submission, that's where we actually evaluate, where the maturity is in your ability to deliver and complete the projects and that kind of stuff. So that would be my one thing.
No, I think I covered most of it. Again, use the real estate wisely, address what you're trying to communicate, and realistically ROI, I think Rosanna mentioned it, the real benefit to DHS and how we're furthering the science. Yeah, that's critical for us to understand what the value proposition of that particular research is.
I would say some of the weaker ones would be proposals that have just buzzword bingo, like you're just saying to us what you think we want to hear rather than the solution that you're actually bringing to the table. I think the other thing that I think makes standout, in addition to the things they've said, but standout submissions are, when you can highlight why you're unique. So going to Sridhar's point about don't bring us something that we've seen probably a million times. And if we have seen it a million times, why is this one different? So what makes yours innovative and special and worth us, going further in the process? So no buzzword bingo, but tell us why you're cool.
And please don't overstate where you are in the process, because that just, it makes it so much harder for us to try to figure out where your technology is in the actual process of development.
Yeah, I thank you, and I would stomp that as well. But also, kind of going back to what you were saying, there's a meeting with small companies a lot during the SBIR program outreach. There was a time when I would get 10 out of the 15 companies would come up and say, we have a way to secure your network. It's like, okay, but to that point, 10 out of the 15 companies coming up and talking to me are saying this. So how is yours different? Why is it better? Now there's AI, there's data analytics, and somebody comes up and say, what data does DHS need to analyze? It's like, what data do we not need to analyze, right? But so understanding where yours is unique, because again, it may not be a fit for everywhere, and we're not going to just peanut butter across. We're not going to go to hey everybody, we got data analytics. There was another part to that, and I can't remember what that other part was, so I'll have to move on. Yeah, well, what I was going to say. Oh, make sure you're giving enough. Sorry, sure. When I remember, I got to go. Make sure you're giving enough information. Sometimes people would come up and talk, and they wouldn't want to give any of the details. They're like, I need to talk to somebody that understands it. It's like, you're not going to get to talk to somebody that understands it without giving some of those details. So make sure your proposal has some of those elements that explain how you're really getting there, like what that innovation is, what that major leap is, what that difference is. Don't gloss over that.
Yeah, I was going to add, think out of the box, right? I mean, if we're thinking of AI, right? Maybe the secure the network, great, but maybe you guys have an innovation to actually figure out how to test it in a novel way, right? Think out of the box, think innovative, think return on investment. Yeah, that's what I would highly recommend.
Can I piggyback?
And make it clear what it is that you're proposing. We've read quite a few of those that I'm like, I don't know what they're proposing at the end of the day. We don't want that either, right?
Both of you triggered something in my brain. A lot of times we get solutions proposed to us where it's like, oh, we'll do this, but we just need all of your data, or we need you to provide these things, or we need a lot from you, government, in order to make this even remotely possible. Well, we will work with you on doing that. I think identifying that as a potential risk and identifying how you would mitigate that. So for example, I formerly led S&T's fentanyl detection program, and we would get solutions, and they said, well, we just need you to give us some fentanyl. And I was like, we can't do that. We'll try to find some solutions, but I need you to develop in a way that I don't have to give you fentanyl. I'm sure we'll both get in trouble. So if there's a case, that might be rare, but just sort of think through those kinds of challenges. If you need data, what is a lower risk way as sort of the entry point as we work towards developing that? Because even providing access to data can take a year or two, and that might tank your project. So just think about those potential pitfalls.
Yeah, think about how you could prove feasibility that would then get to a place that where we've gone, okay, now we know how to get the information to you.
Yeah, one other data point that I did find to be useful on some assessments, not necessarily LRBAAs, but we had companies that would actually go out, if it's a first responder technology, they would build those partnerships to make sure that they're getting the realism and really demonstrate an understanding of that they understand the gap, right? It's not just they imagined it in their sleep and came in and said, this is the solution, but they've sort of understand and have talked to people and really understood what the gap is and how they're going to solve it. So we find that to be a strengthening approach.
All right. So last question, please explain why LRBAA is your favorite. Well, sort of. And we've talked about this a lot, so it may be a reiteration, but I think, it's structured very differently. So if there's a part of the process that you think is a greatest benefit or part of the program, then interested in hearing that.
Okay, I'll go first. So my background is in program management. That's all I've done since I joined S&T in 2016. And I've used all of the tools, all of them. And long range BAA I like because it does provide the flexibility. I can update the topic if there's some niche bit of what is needed. And then from a proposal review standpoint, they can come in at any time, which enables some flexibility and agility on the part of the programs that I'm managing, because I don't have to wait for the next annual call. I have to get my topic right, but it provides that flexibility in terms of solutions, as well as, sort of the timing of when things happen. And then it provides some flexibility. If I magically find money for my program, I may be able to move on a topic that, if I've gotten something. So just a lot of flexibility as a program manager. And then from a review proposal standpoint, the stage gates that we have take some of the time burden off of reviewing the proposals while still seeing the best and brightest solutions that are out there. That's all.
Yeah, I would probably echo that with regard to that. Flexibility, again, LRBAs tend to be a lot more open than SBIRs or SWIPs or very discrete problems that we're trying to solve. So this is more, forward leading. And by the way, sometimes we learn a lot too. So it's a benefit for us as well, because we're supposed to be subject matter experts, but at the end of the day, we only have 8 hours a day. So for you guys to provide innovation, and it helps us understand a problem or think of something in a different way. So we think those are the benefits in terms of, and by the way, I think LRBAs are also a lot more flexible in terms of who can apply, as opposed to any of the other ones, because sometimes small business, you're stuck with small businesses.
You're never stuck with small business.
Well, no, with SBIRs, you are.
You're not stuck.
Okay, sorry, you have some that have.
You have the opportunity to partner.
They're strategically chosen.
Yes, okay. All right, I'm going to get the wet noodles thrown at me later. That's fine. That's fine, I can take it.
But again, we don't know who's out there, so we don't know who's working on different things. So it's really our way. It's really our way to see who's out there and really get beyond some of the typical labs and entities that we normally work with on a day-to-day basis. So we just don't know who's out there working on what, and it's really our way to have you communicate with us.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for agreeing to come, and I didn't give them a lot of heads up, so everybody fit into their come to in-person event close, I see. So glad that worked out for us all. And thank you so much for coming and sharing your insight and all your knowledge in these areas, and for participating in the LRBAA process. Can we give them a hand for appreciation?